Hello and welcome to the Literary Lair. Quantum Leap is back, baby! Or rather, it was back. Man, it sure would have been great if I had this video ready to go back when the show premiered. I wonder if God, time, fate, or whatever would consider that to be a wrong worth righting. Anyway, the new Quantum Leap has thus far been pretty fantastic, even if it is a far cry from the original, and maybe it's a little too modern, prestige-y TV mystery boxy, but one thing that modern TV can't hold a candle to is the quality of licensed tie-in novels that we got from the 80s and 90s. I grew up reading those things, Star Wars, Star Trek, pretty much any show that I liked that had a tie-in novel. Heck, I think I remember reading a Spy Kids one at one point, and I've always considered them to be my bread and butter. Certainly for this show, because it gives me a wealth of screen grabs to put on screen to disguise cuts when I flub my lines. But it's also just interesting to see authors taking what we saw in the show and doing things that wouldn't or couldn't have been done due to budgetary restraints or network meddling. But let's be honest here, tie-in novels, while they are absolutely real and true books in every sense of the word, are also glorified fan fiction, and Quantum Leap specifically seem to have gone after authors with the passion of fanfic writers. This is absolutely a good thing. If I've ever read bad fanfic, it's because it was written by a teenager with no formal training. But I have read some absolutely stellar fanfic as well. So when I say that the novels often feel like fanfic, that's totally meant as a compliment. Fanfic is born of love and passion. Which brings us to this specific novel, Loch Ness Leap. I don't read the Quantum Leap novels in any order. I read them in the order of which ones seem the most interesting to me, so they tend to be the ones that deal with concepts from the show that I enjoyed, like the evil leapers, or the project having glitches that cause Al to leap. But before I get into which element of the show is central to this novel, I ought to give you some backstory in case you're a new Quantum Leap fan, a fan of the new show, or just new to my videos and haven't seen my previous QL videos. Theorizing that one could time travel within his own lifetime, Dr. Sam Beckett stepped into the Quantum Leap accelerator and vanished. He awoke to find himself trapped in the past, facing mirror images that were not his own, and driven by an unknown force to change history for the better. His only guide on this journey is Al, an observer from his own time, who appears in the form of a hologram that only Sam can see and hear. And so Dr. Beckett finds himself leaping from life to life, striving to put right what once went wrong, and hoping each time that his next leap will be the leap home. And this novel has some critical backstory that's not necessary if you saw my last Quantum Leap video, my review of Knights of the Morning Star, but in case you didn't, even though you totally should, hint hint, is that in the Season 5 trilogy of episodes entitled, Trilogy, Sam repeatedly leaped into the life of Abigail Fuller, first as her father, and then as her fiancé, and finally as her lawyer. And let's ignore the inherent squickiness that he was her father before he was her fiancé, but the important leap is that second one into the fiancé. Because during that leap, because they were a couple, Sam slept with Abigail, and according to Ziggy, there's a 91% chance that Abigail's daughter, Sammy Jo Fuller, whose father is officially listed as Will Kinman, his leapee, is Sam's biological daughter, given that she shares his brilliant mind, and after Sam finishes helping Abigail, ends up as a scientist on the project, with no knowledge of her true parentage, naturally. So this is a Sammy Jo novel, and surprisingly, it's the first one I'm aware of that features her as a major character. You'd think that it would be the first concept that they would use, like how one of the other novels has Teresa Bruckner from Another Mother, but no. This is nearly towards the end of the run of novels, but every timeline has the potential to be unwritten. In this leap, Sam becomes a noted scientist who needs to reconcile with his son, but doing so may alter Sammy Jo's life and unravel the project in the process. How? Let's find out. Let's leap into Loch Ness Leap. The cover is a first for these reviews. The Quantum Leap novels had two styles of covers, but thus far we've only ever encountered the first variant. The full cover with the logo at the top, title underneath, and an illustration of Sam, Al, and other various sundries underneath, taking up the entire space of the cover. The other style is one where it's split down the middle, with an illustration taking up a little over half of it, and blank space taking up the rest, with the title and tagline reminding us that it was based on the Universal television series Quantum Leap, created by Donald P. Belisario, with the author's name on the bottom right. I admit, I prefer the other style, both out of familiarity and nostalgia, but also because everything is way too crowded over here in the corner with Sam, Al, the Loch Ness Monster, yeah, he's in this book too, and who I presume to be Sammy Jo in the front. Now, I remember that adult Abigail Fuller was played by Melora Hardin, and since Sammy Jo was played by Kimberly Cullum, who played Abigail as a kid, it would make sense for them to remain identical their whole lives, but I don't really think this is Melora Hardin, but maybe I'm just face blind. All in all, it's not a terrible cover, but it's too crowded. You can't even see Al's outfit that he bought at Dan Flash's with his per diem from the project. Anyway, let's get to the novel itself. Sam comes to after leaping, finding himself on a boat in raging, choppy waters with a Gaelic sailor rowing back to shore. Through Swiss cheese memory, the only thing Sam can really note is that his host is woefully out of shape. Since according to this novel, there's some bleed-through between them and he can feel the exertion despite only rowing for a short time. He also knows that he's somewhere in Europe, but he's an American, because when he gets back to shore, he meets his host's son Travis and Travis's girlfriend Dixie, who each have American accents, Dixie with a pronounced southern drawl. The name might also be an indication, but it's really because her parents were really big fans of Donkey Kong Country 2. Travis questions if Sam got any pictures from the trip out, and Sam isn't sure what he was supposed to have seen until they return to a nearby inn, the Loch Ness Inn. Oh boy, indeed, Sam. Now, if you're a fan of the new Quantum Leap, having back at the project segments might seem normal, but for the original show, except in very rare cases, I think less than 5 times in the entire series, and most of them during the final season, that honor was reserved for the tie-in material, like the novels, which is why we switch over to Samantha Fuller observing the immediate post-Leap interview that Dr. Verbena Beeks is conducting with the Leapy in the waiting room. The interviews are very strictly controlled. They can't give the visitors any indication that they're in the future, so they leave out any identifiable jewelry outside the room, wear only a lab coat, and not use slang, in addition to other rules. But this interview goes sideways fast, because just as the man awakens after questioning where he is and what happened to him, he turns to Samantha and recognizes her, demanding to know where Travis is. Dr. Beeks sedates the man, and Samantha realizes that what the man said unsettled her, because she knew a Travis once. Fun fact, Samantha Fuller was a groupie for Blink-182 back in the day, but frankly she's more of a Tom DeLonge fan now. Back at Loch Ness, Al arrives in a neon blue suit I'd like to have seen on the cover to fill Sam in on who he is and what he's there to do, which involves the Loch Ness Monster, much to Sam's chagrin. Don't worry, Sam, there's another time traveler on hand to help out, although shape-shifting monsters with suckers might be a little out of your wheelhouse. It's 1986, and he's Donald Harding, a theoretical physicist that Sam knows of and whose string theory was important to their work at the Starbright Project. Al also says that this leap makes Ziggy nervous, but Ziggy won't say why. Other than that, Sam's mission is likely, at least 50% likely, to repair Harding's relationship with Travis, since this trip is where they have a huge falling out that will estrange the two, and eventually cause Harding to commit suicide some years later. Father and son couldn't be more different. Harding is a scientist, believes in the rational, and Travis, as Al says, has taken up with the Ghostbuster crowd, paranormal wackos preying on innocent, gullible people.
Did the tree move, or did the apple just fall far from it?
The trip was designed for Travis to convince his father to help fund his research to do a deep sonar experiment in Loch Ness to find the monster, which in the original history, Harding refused to fund. Al is called out of the imaging chamber, leaving Sam to talk with Travis, who is already at an 11 in being frustrated with his father, and verbally attacks Sam almost immediately about how he wishes his father would have faith in him and his research without needing a trip to prove its worth. Al heads out to Ziggy to ask about the incredibly low odds, and Ziggy states that she's told Al all she can at the moment, but that there was some sort of temporal storm that seems to have reverberated from 1986 onwards. But before Al can ask Ziggy to elaborate, Samantha comes in to tell Al that she's visited Scotland before, which frankly doesn't seem like a relevant thing to mention until she adds that she went with an old boyfriend, Travis Harding, in 1986. Unfortunately, before she can elaborate, Ziggy loses contact with Sam and Samantha vanishes. As Sam waits for Travis to cool off, Dixie comes back into the inn, although in the light of the fire, Sam initially thinks of the name Abigail for some reason. She gives Sam a reason you suck speech, tearing into him, or rather Donald Harding, about how he treats Travis poorly and treats Dixie like some vapid moron, having specifically said when he thought she was out of earshot, "Swear she has a brain, if only she'd show sign of it." She also calls him a mean, hateful, lonely man. Sam can remember Harding's research, but nothing about him as a person since they never got to meet. But Sam recalls someone, possibly at the project, telling him that Harding wasn't worth knowing. He also overhears Dixie telling Travis that the trip was a waste of time, that it's not about the monster, it's about Harding believing in his son, but Travis believes that if he can prove the research, he can win his father's affection. It's a heavy leap, and for right now, Sam is on his own. Back at the project, Gushy asks Al who Dr. Fuller is, but no one can remember her because Ziggy and Al are the only ones who remember the changes, although Al won't retain it for long since the effect only works if he's in the imaging chamber when it happens. But that's not all, because Al has a different outfit on, he can't find his cigar, Tina is no longer on site, visiting her mother, who Al swears was dead. This causes a fairly interesting and funny conversation between Al, whose memory fades by the minute, Ziggy, who is as snarky as ever, and Gushy, who has no idea what the heck is going on. It's honestly like an Abbott and Costello routine. Third base. Al puts the place on high alert, all hands on deck, and goes to talk to Dr. Harding, since he might only look like Sam, but his brain is just as qualified to handle quantum physics, even if it's against the rules, because Dr. Fuller is the key to this mystery. Meanwhile, in Mount Shasta, California, Sammy Jo Harding, a recent divorcee, is in the process of resting after moving into a shoebox apartment. To make ends meet, she's working with an old friend Steve, who found a major backdoor that he wants her to hack into, since Mount Shasta is a resort town that has no jobs in the off-season, and she had to sell off a lot of her stuff just to get away from Travis, and she can't find much else with just a high school diploma. What she did bring with her were just the essentials, the Star Wars glasses she can't bear to part with, which may or may not have lead paint in them, technical manuals, her wedding dress, and a copy of Brigadoon, a gift from Sam Larry Stanton, who helped her mother Abigail escape a murder charge when she was a kid. So she needs the money, and she also welcomes the challenge to take her mind off of her crappy life. Of course, it's an illegal job, but money is money. But it makes her recall the last project that Steve had her do, where she was dialing up unlisted government numbers to find out which ones were modems or faxes, and instead got a message on her computer remarking, "Dr. Fuller, you're back," and remarking that she is gone and that whoever it is on the other end, they miss her. Obviously, it freaked her out, and their investigation showed that it was some lab in Stallions Gate, New Mexico, but they weren't able to find out much else. But she never forgot the experience of her ghost computer. Sammy Jo hashes out her terms with Steve, and when the courier shows up to deliver the hardware she'll need, she finds that it isn't a courier after all, it's Steve himself. And we learn that apparently her marriage to Travis fell apart because his love for her simply faded. She asks Steve what's up with this particular job, and he says that it's a government research project, so she raises her rate up 10 times as much because he's that desperate and she really needs cash. Back in Scotland, Sam tries to smooth things over with Travis, but with Dixie by his side, he can barely undo the years of damage that Donald Harding did to their relationship. Travis wants to leave, but Sam insists that he wants to stay, to help, to try to give Travis what he wants. He also finds out Dixie's real name is Samantha, and that her grandmother believed that strangers could rent our bodies sometimes. And sometimes those renters are
Dr. Ben's song from the year 2022.
Then he has a heart-to-heart with the innkeeper, who tells him that fathers and sons and mothers and daughters always have issues like theirs, and lets him know that Travis went to a nearby castle, and Sam goes there to get a momentary truce going between father and son. but he really wishes that Al would find his way back to Scotland. Speaking of, Al goes into the waiting room and kicks Dr. Beeks out so he can talk one-on-one with Harding, gauging his knowledge of the Starbright Project and his own memories, which may be Swiss cheesed, in addition to confirming that Samantha Fuller is Travis's girlfriend. And once he does, he asks Harding for help with Quantum Leap. And he doesn't break down or go into shock, he just asks a million questions about it. With Harding in tow, Al returns to the main chamber, introducing everyone to Dr. Harding against Dr. Beeks' wishes and better judgment. Despite having the exact date, Ziggy can't break through the time storm, so Al goes into the imaging chamber to do the whole swirling search thing, while he leaves Harding in the care of Ziggy, remarking to himself that two supersized egos in the same room could either get ugly or it just might work. Back in Scotland, Sam sits down to a traditional Scottish dinner of hoxpox and asks about how Travis and Dixie met, discovering that Travis was very interested in her family, particularly her grandmother, who was in an asylum and made all sorts of claims about her mother's true love being someone named Sam, who also defended her in a murder trial, even if her lawyer's name was Larry Stanton. I know the surprise is worn off because the audience already found out about it way earlier, but yes, Dixie is Sammy Jo Fuller, and Sam's Swiss cheese memory has finally figured it out. Of course, Sam, in his typical way, lets his emotions cloud his judgment, and he starts saying things that are very out of character for Donald Harding to say, which offends Sammy Jo and Travis because it seems like he's making fun of her and her family. Can I get another oh boy? Back at the project, Al exits the imaging chamber after another failed round of trying to call up Sam's coordinates. And don't worry, they already checked all his birthdays, even the actual day of his birth this time. He goes out into the main control room to find Harding trying to get his bearings and theorizing that Quantum Leap is some mass delusion, that he's actually Sam Beckett with a brain injury and not the actual Dr. Harding from Loch Ness. Dr. Beeks dispels that notion pretty quickly, though, and the discussion leads Al to choose another target for their search, Sammy Jo, and they find her in Loch Ness, but Ziggy warns that altering history again could potentially mean losing Sam forever. Sammy Jo begins her work and reminisces on her life thus far, and what has led her to this place. Her relationship with Travis was doomed from the start. He was interested in her family history more than he was interested in her, only proposed to piss off his father, and she had a desperate need to belong somewhere, because for her whole life she was followed by death and ridicule as the little girl whose grandmother was touched. That whole Lita Ader murder trial. The only father figure she ever had was a lawyer who wasn't the same after the trial, and she dumbed herself down, never showing off her brilliant intelligence because she just wanted to be normal. She can't even return to her mother, not because she won't have her, but as a point of pride. But all that comes to a halt when the computer starts talking to her, telling her that it missed her and that they knew each other in another lifetime. Sammy Jo is incredulous, but the parallel hybrid computer named Ziggy makes a compelling argument, referring to events that might be public record but are also hyper-specific. But it cuts off communication after telling her that the other life they knew each other in was the one in which she never married Travis. This freaks out Sammy Jo something fierce. Another lifetime, one where she made different choices? Never marrying Travis, her life not being in the toilet? Could it be real? Sam, meanwhile, is ruminating on how much he's lost to leaping, including his daughter and the time he could have had with her, seeing her grow up, and even the fact that he didn't even recognize her until way farther into the leap than it should have taken. He has another conversation with Travis, but it goes just about as well as all the other ones. Travis refuses to have a calm, rational conversation, even if Sam is just trying to figure out his point of view. At the project, Ziggy reveals her contact with Sammy Jo in the present, and it allows Al to justify locking on to Sammy Jo instead of Sam at Loch Ness, because if she remembers Dr. Harding acting strangely, it would indicate that Sam was still there, even in the altered timeline. Unfortunately, when Ziggy asks about Donald Harding, Sammy Jo clams up and shuts off the line, because she thinks that someone is on to her, and having committed illegal acts is naturally worried about the repercussions. In Loch Ness, Sam has a heart-to-heart with Sammy Jo, her revealing that she never finished high school math because her teacher was a grade-A nozzle who shamed her because she corrected him a few times and scared her off of taking advanced math courses to avoid him. He does this so he can finally drop the bombshell, that he is Sam Beckett, but that he was also Larry Stanton and Will Kinman and Clayton Fuller, and that he has a connection to both her and her mother. Unfortunately, she still doesn't believe and thinks that Harding is just using her past to screw with her, but Sam manages to reach an understanding with her after she reveals that her academic struggles weren't because she gave up on herself, but because being a smart little girl, all the teachers were nozzles and tried to sabotage her. So she learned to be quiet, do the bare minimum, and keep her head down. And with that conversation, they take their first steps toward understanding together. Ziggy talks to Al alone and tells him that getting Sammy Jo back on staff is of top priority, and Al intends to use the federal resources of the project to drag Sammy Jo to the project to get answers, but Ziggy brings up a wrinkle in his plan to lock onto her in the past. In return, with the DNA she shares with Sam, she might be able to see him, which would alter the timeline yet again. And while it won't affect her chances at having a good life, it will affect Sam's chances of getting home, because all probability says that Sammy Jo is the key to retrieving Sam. So I guess that means that she never ends up back on staff, because Dr. Beckett with one T never returned home. Or maybe that's what she changed Sam's name so that a different Sam Beckett, no relation, is the one who never returned home. But Al does send out an APB for her, and when Sammy Jo barrels past the stop sign, a local Shasta cop pulls her over and runs her plates, discovering that she's to be brought in and flown immediately to New Mexico. This is why I never understand why people drive faster when they're doing the wrong thing. Don't draw attention to yourself. Travis gets a glimpse of Nessie and rushes in with camera in hand, having taken photos, so he and Sam go about setting up a darkroom in the inn's basement. Sammy Jo remarks about if Sam believes Travis saw something, but Sam just says that Travis believes, and that's enough. Al takes custody of Sammy Jo and has her held in a separate location of the project, what fans of the new Quantum Leap would call a precursor to Guantanamo Bay, although this project has a much better reason to hold someone against their will. What Al finds out from their conversation is that this picture situation turns sour, with Sam implying the photos were faked, which causes a major blowout between Travis and the supposed Dr. Harding, and Sammy Jo says that she hasn't seen Harding since and believes that his discussion about Sam Beckett was meant to mock her. But knowing Sam was there gives Al reason to center in on Sammy Jo's brainwaves instead, and he does so, heading back into the imaging chamber. Upon his arrival, he tries to get Sammy Jo's attention, and to her surprise, she notices the guy in the loud suit, but she doesn't believe it, thinking it's some holographic projection that Dr. Harding set up to trick her. Al manages to impart some information to Sam through Sammy Jo, but she quickly gets fed up and storms out of the inn in disgust. Thankfully, they manage to center back in on Sam, and Al fills Sam in properly, that Ziggy believes that Sam is there to convince Sammy Jo to go to college and pursue physics, which is easier said than done since Harding is an asshole who Al remarks couldn't convince Liz Taylor to buy diamonds. Father and daughter finally have a heartfelt conversation, where Sam explains that he thinks she has a gift and that science isn't about disproving fantastical phenomena. It's about figuring out the essence of life and discovering explanations for things. Sammy Jo says that Travis is a lot like Dr. Harding in one respect. They both need proof. Travis only wants proof of the magic, but sometimes the proof takes the magic away. What they can both agree on, Sam and Sammy Jo, is that they need to get those photos from Travis before he embarrasses himself. That was enough to do it, and Al starts to fill Sam in on the change to the timeline. Sammy Jo thankfully doesn't marry Travis, they have an amicable breakup, and Travis finds a new passion, paleontology. Sammy Jo ends up back at the project in a much more substantial role, and Harding has been a consultant on Project Quantum Leap from the start, a result of his interactions during the leap, and with Al and the others. But Sam isn't leaping yet. God, fate, time, or whatever, the exalted GTF dubs, is giving him some much-needed time with his daughter. And I'm sure you saw this coming, but before the novel ends and Sam leaps, Sam gets a glimpse of the Loch Ness Monster. Let's just hope it doesn't ask for money. The premise is really interesting. It's one of those concepts that seems like a no-brainer. Not only is the Loch Ness Monster a premise that couldn't have really been done in the show, both because Sam very rarely left the continental United States, budgetary reasons I assume, and because a convincing Loch Ness Monster is tough to pull off. Case in point, Doctor Who's take on it. Although, in fairness, that was the 70s and on the BBC budget. But Quantum Leap probably wouldn't have fared much better, considering how much money they must have spent on music, so either the visuals or audios would have suffered in a televised episode. And of course, the idea of the timeline fracturing in such a way that gives us a real view into an alternate timeline is only something I remember happening in one other novel that I'm familiar with, Random Measures, having the leap causing Al to have a new wife that he's never met before. And maybe Too Close for Comfort, but that might have just been the ending where Al got shot. You ever stop and think about how weird these books are? And of course, Sammy Jo is a concept ripe for storytelling. I wonder if they'd have touched on her more if the show had continued for another season or two. And considering that Deborah Pratt has said in the past how much she loves Sammy Jo, maybe we might see her in the reboot. Pretty please? And I like the Leap story. The idea of this father and son who are so estranged that neither of them is willing to listen to the other side of any story. Although it did seem at parts that Travis was a little too obtuse. Sure, the real Donald Harding would have been just the same, but when Sam seemed to be trying, couldn't Travis have at least tried? Same with Sammy Jo / Dixie. She attacks every comment he makes, even when he's being uncharacteristically nice for Harding. It's like Sam takes one step forward and two back a few times, which feels like it's more padding than actually furthering the story, since it all boils down to restoring an amicable relationship. I also liked how slimy and dickish Dr. Harding was. Usually the person on the leap deserves Sam's help, but Harding sure didn't, and I liked how Sam had to deal with the fact that he was in the body of an utter asshole, and how Al and the project had to deal with that asshole in order to help Sam. It was also great to see how the authors developed Sammy Jo's backstory and filled in between her childhood and working at the project. It was particularly great to see how terrible teachers in school had essentially beaten any scientific interest out of her because of discrimination based on gender and classism. That it was easier and safer to be the ditzy Dixie than the brilliant Sammy Jo is a great addition to her backstory, compared to Sam's Wonderkin status, where he was a brilliant mind, but he also had a lot of support, playing Carnegie Hall at 19, being at least interviewed by Time magazine, probably appearing on the cover. He didn't undergo the same discrimination that Sammy Jo did. I also liked how it touched on Al and his struggles with remembering different timelines. It's something that they touch upon in other novels and a little bit in the show in The Leap Home Part 2, but I really like how Al is wearing a different outfit. He can't find his cigar, and he's wondering, do I even smoke in this timeline? And not even being sure of anything at the project because his memories are a mishmash of different timelines and he doesn't know what's current to the timeline he's currently in versus what he feels like he remembers from 20 minutes ago. You know, it's a sort of corollary to that mention in the previous book that I reviewed, Knights of the Morning Star, where they dealt with the fact that Al has to reconcile the fact that he lived in a timeline where Jackie Kennedy died in 1963, but also a timeline where Jackie Kennedy didn't die. It's difficult, and I like how this one kind of boils it down to a more personal level because it really gives him that existential crisis about his own knowledge and memories. That being said, I do have some gripes with the book. It was a tad rushed, and dramatic irony only goes so far. The wiggling around with Sam not knowing it was Sammy Jo, even though the reader knew for so long, was a little annoying at points. I was pretty frustrated because I just wanted to get on with it and have Sam get those moments with Sammy Jo that he never got on the show. There's also a lot of build-up of this other timeline that kind of gets pushed aside. Like, we spend all this time getting in with Sammy Jo's backstory and her divorce and her hacking stuff, but in the end, none of that even matters to the leap. It's not like the future version of Sammy Jo actually factors into things outside of confirming what happened in the past. Other Sammy Jo doesn't even get a chance to choose the other timeline, like Tasha Yar in Yesterday's Enterprise on Star Trek, or any other piece of media that deals with the restoration of a timeline. Usually, someone from that other timeline gets to choose whether or not to restore the proper flow of events. JFK in Ticket to Ride on Red Dwarf assassinated himself to save the world. Donna Noble got struck down by a car in order to save all of time and space. But Sammy Jo is just left in Guantanamo Bay and snap, everything's back to normal. True, people in the leaps don't usually get to choose, but people in the leaps aren't usually working on the project in another timeline and Sam's daughter. She gets to make the choices within the leap, but even then, it's still Sam's show, and she's just along for the ride for the most part. An interesting thing to note about this book, though, is that it wasn't written by just one author. Sandy Schofield is the pen name of husband and wife writing team Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush, who have written both this and a Star Trek novel together under the pen name, and under their own names write a bunch of other Star Trek novels across the franchises. And Dean even edited for the Strange New Worlds anthologies, which I used to love when I used to get them from the library when I first got into Star Trek. Oh, and they also did the novelization for the game Star Trek Klingon, so they definitely know how to experience beige. It does make me wonder, though, how the book was written and how the collaborative effort worked. Did one of them handle the Sammy Jo story and the other Sam's story? Did they outline it together and work on it side by side? I imagine that probably would have been difficult in the days before Google Drive was a thing, but it honestly doesn't show that it was written by two people. It feels like one cohesive story, and I'd never have known that it was written by two people if they didn't own up to the fact that it was a pen name in the About the Author. I wonder why that is, considering that they haven't written all that much under the name. Was it maybe one of those silly rules that also created Richard Bachman for Stephen King? Or was it just because they wrote it together? Maybe so no one got top billing over the other? Yeah, I'm rambling again. But yeah, I really like this one. So, that was Loch Ness Leap. The book's so nice, I bought it twice! I own two because I bought one for this review and then stumbled upon a lot of 3 books that included 2 fairly rare Quantum Leap books, Obsessions and Foreknowledge, and this one, and it was a really good price, so I just bought all 3, even if I only needed 2. But this one is in far better condition, so it wasn't a waste. So if anyone wants a copy of Loch Ness Leap, let me know, I've got one to spare. Here's hoping that Season 2 of Quantum Leap from the year 2022 will remember that it's a sequel and not a reboot, and feature some elements from the original show. Talking Ziggy, gummy bear handling. Sammy Jo? Give me something, Dean Drageris. And to the rest of you, see you next time.